Close your eyes for a moment. It's May 1787. The streets of Philadelphia are muddy from spring rain. Horse-drawn carriages clatter over cobblestone. Merchants call out to customers. Ships unload goods across the Delaware River. But inside one brick building, Independence Hall, history is about to take a remarkable turn. The windows are shut tight despite the summer heat. Thick curtains block curious eyes. Guards stand outside. No reporters, no cameras, no social media. 55 delegates from 12 states have agreed on one rule. What happens in this room stays in this room. Why? Because they know the conversations ahead will be extremely difficult. They need the freedom to disagree, to change their minds, and to debate openly without public pressure. Officially, they've gathered to revise the Articles of Confederation. Unofficially, many already suspect they'll need something much bigger. By the end of that summer, they won't simply repair the America's government. They'll reinvent it. Hey guys, this is Sarah from Constitution Unlocked. At Constitution Unlocked, I believe kids deserve to know their rights and understand the document that helps define them. I created this podcast to provide that foundation by explaining the Constitution's words, history, debates, and impact in a clear and engaging way. Today, we're stepping inside one of the most important meetings in world history. The Constitution Convention began on May 25, 1787. Not everyone came. Rhode Island refused to send delegates because it feared a strong national government. Those who did attend represented a variety of backgrounds. Many had fought in the Revolutionary War. Some were lawyers, others were merchants or plantation owners. They often disagreed sharply on what the country's future should look like. One person immediately stood out, George Washington. He was unanimously chosen to preside over the convention. His role wasn't to dominate the debates. In fact, he actually rarely spoke. His presence alone gave the gathering credibility. If Washington believed the convention mattered, Americans paid attention. Meanwhile, another delegate would become known as the father of the Constitution. James Madison arrived with stacks of books about government throughout history. Before the convention even began, he spent months studying ancient democracies, republics, and political systems from around the world. He was not improvising. He was preparing to answer one of history's hardest questions. How do you build a government that lasts? It did not take long at all for disagreements to emerge. One of the biggest debates at the convention was about representation. In other words, who gets power in Congress? Representation determines whose voice matters, whose interests are protected, and who can shape laws. So the debate became a battle between large states and small states. The large states had a fairly simple argument. We have more people, so we should have more representatives. If a state has more people living in it, then more people are affected by the laws. So shouldn't that state have more power in making those laws? That was the logic behind the Virginia Plan. The Virginia Plan wanted representation based on population. So if your state had more people, your state would get more representatives. To big states, this seemed absolutely fair. Why should a small state with fewer people have the same power as a large state with many more people? But small states saw this very differently. To them, population-based representation sounded like domination. If big states got more representatives, then big states could and would control Congress. Small states feared that they would be ignored, that their needs would be pushed aside, that their votes would matter less. And if the national government was become stronger, smaller states wanted protection. So, they supported a different idea, the New Jersey Plan. Under the New Jersey Plan, each state would have equal representation. One state equals one equal voice. To small states, that seemed fair because each state was its own political community. Each state had joined the Union. Each state deserved equal respect. But, as I said, to large states, representation seemed unfair. So, both sides had a point, and both sides were afraid. Large states feared being held back by smaller states, and smaller states feared being swallowed up by larger ones. This is where the convention could have fallen apart, because this was not just some small disagreement. This was about power. And when people argue over power, compromise becomes extremely difficult. At one point, delegates seriously worried that the convention would collapse. Then came a proposal that changed everything. Robert Sherman of Connecticut suggested a compromise. One house of Congress, the House of Representatives, would be based on population to satisfy the bigger states. The other, the Senate, would give every state 2 senators to satisfy the smaller states. Large states gained influence in one chamber, and small states gained equal representation in the other. Neither side got everything it wanted, but both got enough to keep negotiating. Compromise, it turns out, became one of the Constitution's defining features. The delegates agreed that the Articles had created a government that was too weak to function. But they also feared creating one that was too powerful. They had just fought a revolution against a king, and no one wanted another monarchy. So, instead of concentrating power in one person, they divided it. The legislative branch would make laws, the executive branch would enforce them, and the judicial branch would interpret them. Each branch would have tools to limit the others. Today, we know this as checks and balances. The delegates didn't assume leaders would always act wisely. They assumed that people are imperfect. Their solution was not to depend on perfect leaders, but it was to design a system where ambition could check ambition. As James Madison famously later wrote in Federalist No. 51, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." It's one of the Constitution's most enduring insights. But not every compromise should be celebrated in the same way. Some compromises solve problems. Some hold people together. But some reveal a nation's deepest failures. That brings us to slavery. This is one of the most important and painful parts of the Constitution Convention. Because the delegates were not just debating abstract ideas about government, they were debating a country where slavery already existed. And instead of fully confronting the moral reality of slavery, the Constitution often treated it as a political problem to manage. That is important. Because the question was not simply, is slavery right or wrong? The question became, how will enslaved people be counted for political power and taxation? Southern states wanted enslaved people to count toward their population. Why? Because if enslaved people counted as part of a state's population, Southern states would get more seats in the House of Representatives. More seats meant more power. But the Southern states did not want enslaved people to count when determining taxes. They wanted enslaved people counted when it helped them politically, but not when it cost them financially. Northern states argued the exact opposite. They did not want enslaved people counted for representation because that would give the Southern states more political power. But they wanted them counted for taxation so that they would be taxed less than the Southern states. So the debate was not just moral. It was completely political. It was economic. It was all about power. And the compromise that they reached was the 3/5 compromise. Under this compromise, enslaved people would be counted as 3/5 of a person for purposes of representation and taxation. That sentence should feel disturbing, because it is disturbing. A human being reduced to a fraction for political calculations is not just a technical detail. It is a moral failure written into the structure of the government. The Constitution is a remarkable achievement, but it was written by human beings with disagreements, limitations, and blind spots. Later generations would amend the Constitution and continue the work of expanding its promises to more Americans. After nearly 4 months of debate, revision, and compromise, the delegates reached the end. On September 17, 1787, 39 delegates signed the Constitution. Not everyone approved. Some refused to sign because they believed the document gave the national government too much power. Others worried it didn't protect individuals strongly enough. Benjamin Franklin, then 81 years old, addressed the delegates before signing. He admitted that he didn't agree with every part of the Constitution, but he also believed perfection wasn't possible. He supported it because he thought it was the best government they could achieve together. It's a reminder that democracy often isn't about finding perfect solutions. It's about building workable ones. The delegates left Philadelphia knowing that their work was not finished. The Constitution would not become law automatically. It still had to be ratified by the states. Across the country, Americans began debating a fundamental question. Should they trust this new Constitution? Supporters and opponents alike wrote essays, gave speeches, and argued in newspapers and town meetings. Some feared that the new government would be too powerful. Others believed that the nation would fail without it. The debate would ultimately lead to one of the Constitution's most important additions, the Bill of Rights. But that's a story for another episode. The Constitution Convention wasn't simply a meeting of famous founders. It was a conversation about power, freedom, representation, compromise, and the future. Those conversations did not end in 1787. Oh no, they are still continuing today. Every time Americans debate voting rights, free speech, privacy, or the powers of the government, they are continuing the dialogue that began in that room in Philadelphia. The Constitution isn't just a historical document. It is an ongoing project. And every generation, including ours, has a role in interpreting, questioning, and improving it. Okay, the interesting fact for today is the oldest person who signed the Constitution was Benjamin Franklin at age 81. He had to be carried in a sedan chair to the convention due to his failing health. Legends claim he needed assistance to even lift his pen to sign the Constitution, and some even claim that tears streamed down his face as he signed the document. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode. If you enjoyed listening to this episode, please make sure to follow us on our Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube account. Or follow our Constitution Unlocked profiles on Instagram and TikTok.